Well, we can speak now on the program to Oleksiy Mutsky. He's a law student currently in the northern Ukrainian city of Chernihiv. Thank you very much indeed for finding the time to talk to us today here on France 24. Just tell us a bit about where you are and give us a sense of what your daily life looks like right now.
Hello, thank you very much. As for me, as it was said, I am currently in the northern part of Ukraine, the city of Chernihiv, which is not so far away from Kiev, but it's also very close to Belarusian frontier. And unfortunately, Russian armies, together with Belarusian, attack our city. Yesterday night, we had a very heavy bombing of the district where I live. Several apartments were burnt, and in my home, several windows were damaged. In the hallway, it's very cold right now because there is no glass at all. The city is blocked. There are mines all around the city, and it's impossible to get out.
And we see you now, though, on Skype. Are you in your apartment right now? You know, you say that windows have been broken in your apartment. Do you feel safe staying where you are?
No, the windows are not broken in my apartment exactly, but in the hallway of my house. And now I can hear the siren, so basically it means that I need to hide.
Do go. Do not stay with us if you feel unsafe. Are you able to go underground?
Excuse me?
Are you able to go underground now?
Yes.
As I said, please do go if you feel unsafe, sir. We don't want you to stay just to speak to us.
Okay, so thank you very much.
All right, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you for talking to us. Oleksiy Mutsky there was speaking to us there, but he heard air raid sirens in the background of the northern city that he was in. That's the city of Chernihiv. We hope very much that he is safe. We'll keep an eye on developments coming out of that city in the north for you during the afternoon.
Я думаю, что мы попадем в каменный век. Вот все. Если сейчас ребята, наши старшие друзья, не договорятся, то все накроется медным тазом.
Все катится к чертям. Других слов нет.
У меня есть $100, которые я не тратил уже где-то 2 года, ожидая, что будет хуже. Но это вряд ли меня спасет.
Потому что очень много людей, которые не понимают, к чему ведет наше правление пока. В экономике не во всем порядка не будет.
Пока сложно что-либо сказать. Я пока не прочувствовала, то есть никакой разницы.
Цены растут, разумеется. Накопления уменьшаются благополучно. Акции-то падают.
Наше экономическое положение сильно ухудшится. И боюсь, что это в этих обстоятельствах неизбежно, но как бы это все равно не сравнить с теми потерями, которые несут люди, которые по вине наших войск погибают в своих домах. Мы на связи с нашими украинскими друзьями, и как бы нет слов, чтобы их утешить.
We start then with that developing story we're watching for you out of the Ukrainian capital. There are reports this afternoon that a Russian airstrike has hit Kyiv's main television tower, this in the very heart of the Ukrainian capital, knocking out some state broadcasting but leaving part of the structure intact. Now, this is according to Ukrainian government officials this afternoon. As you can see in those images there, smoke is rising from what is the Babi Yar district of the capital. The Interior Ministry saying equipment has been damaged and that the channels, quote, won't work for a while. Well, let's speak to our foreign editor, Philip Turle, about what we're looking at out of Kyiv, and clearly dramatic scenes indeed, Philip, and concern perhaps that build-up of Russian troops, while they are still moving, the focus now is on that strike in the capital.
Well, there are several elements which we need to take into consideration. The first one is that, of course, in any war, one of the main targets will be the TV, radio, media to stop one of the parties or both parties from giving out information. And what we've seen here so far is that the Russian side, the Russian people, are not getting the full story about what's going on in Ukraine, because Russian media, which is totally under the control of Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin, is giving the pro-Kremlin point of view. So this would be one of the key targets of the Russian forces, is to take out television, radio broadcasting in Ukraine so that people can't get correct information. Now, this attack on this radio tower has been confirmed by the Ukrainian authorities, and they say that it will lead to some disruption in television being broadcast, but it doesn't mean it's going to be off the air forever. They say that programs may be restored within the next few hours, but it comes just hours after Russia had called on the people of the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, to leave, evacuate areas where there were important military installations, which leads one to believe that this assault is sort of imminent now. We've seen this build-up of a convoy of military vehicles and tanks stretching over 60 kilometers on its way to the Ukrainian capital. So I think it's only a question of time before we see this beginning to move into action. As far as the Kremlin goes, well, the actual position there has not shifted. It's denied that it's involved in shelling any civilian areas. We've seen the contrary of that with what's been going on in Kharkiv in northeastern Ukraine. It's denied that it's using cluster bombs. We've seen those being used as well. And it's now saying that it's taken control of all the sea line around the south of Ukraine. So it's cutting off the ability by the Ukrainian authorities to bring in support via the sea. So no change in the position of the Russian authorities. And this is the next step, I think, to what they see is taking out information that could be given to the Ukrainian people.
Philip Turle, thanks very much indeed for your thoughts on that breaking news story we're watching for you out of Kyiv. We can
Hello, welcome to another edition of The Interview on France 24. My guest today, the Foreign Minister of one of Ukraine's immediate neighbours and a member of both NATO and the European Union, Bogdan Orescu. Thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'd like to start, Mr. Orescu, by speaking about the military situation in Ukraine. There's a 40-kilometre-long convoy of Russian military vehicles not far outside Kiev. What do you think Vladimir Putin is planning?
Well, unfortunately, the situation in Ukraine, as far as the security is concerned, is becoming worse and worse. It seems that the Russian president is continuing this aggression against the sovereign and independent state of Ukraine, and this is very much unfortunate. We have seen that this is happening despite the round of consultations which took place yesterday between the Ukrainian and the Russian diplomats. Mm-hmm. And this is indeed very unfortunate. I think that negotiations cannot be resultative if they are under heavy fire. So the situation indeed, it's very difficult, and I do hope that the appeals of the international community will be heard by President Putin.
Well, at the weekend, however, Vladimir Putin put his nuclear arsenal on a heightened state of readiness, the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. A credible threat, or do you think it's saber rattling?
Well, I think it's extremely irresponsible to make a threat with the use of nuclear weapons. I don't think that in the 21st century we should make such threats. And I'm not personally convinced that this would be followed by the use of actual use of nuclear weapons. But still, the threat of using nuclear weapons is something which is very much unacceptable, and it was condemned as such by the international community. We have also condemned that. I was personally condemning that during the Foreign Affairs Council of the European Union meeting on the 27th of February in Brussels, and all my colleagues did the same.
The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has asked the West to enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine. What's your position on that?
Well, I think the position which was already expressed by NATO was quite clear, and it was also expressed by other NATO allies. Doing so would mean that NATO would be involved directly in this military conflict, and this cannot happen since Ukraine is not a member of the North Atlantic Alliance. That would mean that NATO would be directly involved in this military confrontation. Unfortunately, this is a request that cannot be met with a positive response by NATO.
There are, however, more NATO troops and weaponry being deployed into Romania in the coming days. Does this make Romania safer or more vulnerable to attack? Vladimir Putin, of course, speaking in recent weeks and months about NATO building up in Eastern and Central Eastern Europe as being a provocation.
It cannot be seen as a provocation. It cannot be seen as an escalatory measure whatsoever, because what we have done since 2014, after the illegal occupation of Crimea on the eastern flank, was a response. It was a reaction in self-defense. It was a reaction which, in fact, is building the deterrence and defense posture of NATO on this eastern flank because of the actions which were undertaken by Russia. If we compare the size of the forces, roughly 15,000 on the eastern flank, with more than 150,000 Russian military in the Black Sea basin, well, I think it's quite clear that what NATO is doing on the eastern flank is not at all a provocation towards Russia, but rather a legitimate response by the North Atlantic Alliance to the benefit of the security of the allies on the eastern flank. We have asked for a consolidation of the posture of NATO on the eastern flank for quite some time, but this crisis has accelerated this process. And we continue to ask for more troops and more equipment on the territory of Romania and the southern part of the eastern flank, which is the most exposed. Romania has the longest allied border, land border with Ukraine. We have more than 640 kilometers border with Ukraine. We have Crimea at roughly 300 kilometers off the coast of Romania over the northwestern basin of the Black Sea. And I think it's very legitimate to have more NATO troops in Romania. The US soldiers already arrived. The French military is coming these days in Romania. Other allies like Belgium will deploy forces in Romania, and I think it's very important to see that the Allied solidarity works. And we very much welcome more allies to come in Romania, in the southern part of the eastern flank, at the Black Sea, because indeed we need such deterrence and defense in the face of what Russia is doing in our direct neighborhood.
When our reporters have spoken to people on the ground in the countries specifically that directly border Ukraine, so Romania, Poland, of course, Hungary, Slovakia, many people are expressing fear that the war could spill over into their country. Do you believe that that is a possibility?
We consider that Romania and the Romanian citizens have no reason to fear, because we are covered by the guarantees, the security guarantees, which are enshrined in Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. The collective defense, which is guaranteed by NATO and by the allied forces, is ironclad. And I think the spillover will not affect, in any case, NATO countries. But indeed, the security situation as a whole is deteriorating. That's why, as we have discussed previously, the consolidation of the eastern flank is taking place. And measures taken by NATO, again, are nothing but a response to the aggressive stance by Russia.
Now, within Ukraine, we have had reports from Human Rights Watch and others about the use of cluster bombs, civilians being targeted by Russian forces. Do you believe that the evidence is there that Russia is committing these alleged war crimes?
Well, we cannot say that this is happening because we do not have, eyes on the ground. But if this happens, actually, this is, of course, very much against international law. It is very much against the norms which are regulating warfare, and it is very much against the international humanitarian law. That's why the International Criminal Court in The Hague started today to examine the possibility of opening an investigation on possible war crimes and crimes against humanity during the conflict in Ukraine. And I think such an investigation is a legitimate one.
Just on another human rights issue, there is much concern about refugees fleeing Ukraine. A great many of them we know going towards Romania. Now, in total, the United Nations says that 660,000 people have fled Ukraine in various directions. Do you know how many of them are in Romania or coming to Romania?
Yes, of course we know, because we monitor very carefully the situation, and we have decided to facilitate the entry in Romania of all Ukrainian citizens that need protection. And by now, if we start counting as of the 10th of February until yesterday, more than 130,000 Ukrainian citizens have entered Romania. Almost 40,000 stayed in Romania. So we have calculated the numbers of entries and exits towards other countries of the European Union. And we are very much decided to take care of these persons which are in great need of protection. Mainly mothers and children are coming. We are trying together with the civil society in Romania, with a large number of NGOs and regular Romanians, to provide assistance, to provide shelter, to provide food, to provide medicine, and whatever is needed for them to feel safe, because Romania is a safe country.
You mentioned there about facilitating the entry of Ukrainian citizens. I want to ask you about citizens of other countries who have been resident in Ukraine or found themselves in Ukraine. Are they included in the people that Romania is taking in, is prepared to take in?
Absolutely, and we have facilitated the entry in Romania of citizens of other countries, of partner countries. There are a lot of citizens of third countries, both from EU and NATO member states, but also from countries around the world, which asked our support, and we have provided support, and we have facilitated their entry in Romania and then the evacuation to their countries of citizenship, of origin. We have also facilitated a large number of personnel of diplomatic missions from Ukraine to enter Romania and then leave for their countries. Romania is open and very much available to grant support to all those in need, to all those citizens of Ukraine, but also of other countries who are in distress in this country and want to get out of the country in a safe manner.
Now, we're recording this on the day when the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, made an emotional appeal to the European Parliament, Commission and Council to support Ukraine formally starting on the path to EU membership. Several EU member states, including your neighbour Bulgaria, are supporting immediately granting Ukraine what's known as candidate country status and opening negotiations. Does Romania also support that?
Yes, of course, and Romania supports not only from out of this crisis, on the occasion of this crisis, the European perspective of Ukraine, but we have supported this for quite some time. Romania was the first EU member state to ratify some years ago the association agreement and the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement of Ukraine with the European Union. And we support not only the European perspective of Ukraine, but also of the Republic of Moldova and of Georgia, because we consider that the place of these countries is within the European Union. So granting the European perspective or reaffirming the European perspective of these countries is a matter of priority for Romania. This was already expressed as such and underlined in a very resolute manner by President Iohannis of Romania, by myself. And we are providing concrete help in that respect. Of course, granting the European perspective is something that it is deserved by these countries, but the accession itself is indeed a long process which requires a lot of reforms in the candidate countries. But we are very much decided to help in this process.
Bogdan Orescu, Foreign Minister of Romania, thank you very much for speaking to us on France 24.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to you as well for watching the programme, and hope to see you soon here on France 24.
In now on the programme, Lulia Mendel. She's a former spokesperson for the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. It's a role she held until last year. Thank you for finding the time to speak to us today on France 24. Can I just ask you, first of all, about that breaking news that this television tower in Kyiv has apparently been hit? Are you aware of that? And are you aware, as somebody who's currently in the country, whether state broadcasting has been affected?
Yes, of course, I've heard this news already because we are constantly glued to our televisions and to the internet. We are trying to verify the information. And of course, this is the true story, unfortunately. But up to now, we have our television on, thanks God, because our major televisions have united to provide the information together with the capacities that all of these channels have. So it's easier to verify the information, to get the sources, and to tell the information from different regions of Ukraine. Of course, this will damage the part of information, and this says a very important thing. You know, Russia fully censored their society. Russia is fighting against internet and, of course, against free television. And in Ukraine, which is a territory of freedom on post-Soviet Union, he cannot have that much influence. He cannot censor our country, and the disinformation here does not work that well as he wanted. So that's why, of course, he uses bombs and shelling against broadcasters.
And you're speaking to us, as I understand it, Lulia, from the western city of Lviv. It is thought to be relatively safe, at least compared to the capital. Tell us a bit about what life is like for you right now.
Thank you for asking this, and you are actually absolutely correct about saying that it is relatively safe. In fact, Russia, in the first day of its attack, showed that it can target any region of the country. So in the first day of invasion, Russia targeted 16 regions of Ukraine of 25, and 3 of them were very western regions. So when you live in Lviv, which is relatively safe, you hear constantly the air alerts, because our security, of course, is looking forward about different moves in the sky. But also there are a lot of checkpoints around the country. Some of the checkpoints are made by the servicemen and National Guard of Ukraine, but some of them are, as I call them, handmade. But they are really secure checkpoints. They are made by ordinary men. In the first day of invasion, President Zelensky allowed Ukrainians who want to defend their country to get free rifles. So we have a lot of territorial defense units, and these are common men who want to defend their country, their towns, their villages, their wives and kids. So they also make checkpoints and try to defend the country. Life here is relatively okay, but we have sometimes shortage of provision. All their shops and many services are closed. The military uniform is popular, and of course we hear air alerts, and we see the military helicopters flying. And of course, we understand that there is a lot of military equipment and techniques that is moving around the country, in major case to help Kyiv defend itself, but also to help defend other territories of the country.
And Lulia, does all of that make you consider leaving Ukraine?
As for me and my fiance, we decided to stay in the country as to the very end, because we actually dream of returning back to Kyiv. We left it because we understood that we can do something when we are out of this big risk, and then we don't need to hide in their bomb shelters every moment. Right now, my concerns are mostly about my family, my parents, my aunt, my cousin, his 3 kids. All of them are in the south region, and all of them are surrounded. And we see how Russian military is walking on the streets. And we see that the biggest mall is on fire, and they are targeting schools and residential houses. This is a disaster and a war crime that must end.
And you are the former spokesperson for Zelensky, for the president. So I suppose you're in a better position than most people to help us get inside the mindset of an individual who's become something of a hero. I mean, certainly in Ukraine, but I think in other countries as well. We understand the United States offered him help out of Kyiv when the war started. He said he wanted to stay. Is it your understanding that he will probably stay in Kyiv now, no matter what?
You know, Volodymyr Zelensky has also always represented himself as a leader. And when we talk about the leader, one of the magic characteristics is that he wants to stay nearby his people. When I've heard about this really kind gesture of the United States to offer Volodymyr Zelensky to evacuate from the city, I knew that it wouldn't happen. And President Zelensky was traveling to Donbass very often during my 2 years of working for him. For 3 years, he's been there like from 35 to 40 times, I guess. And he never avoided going to the zones of risks. When, for instance, there was some kind of shelling from Russian side, he was joining soldiers. And even his security didn't allow him to do that. He said, well, there are our soldiers sitting there when it's shelling. So why would I run away? I'm not a coward. So this is some part of his character, that he really wants to stay with people. And when people are there, they think that if to suffer, then, we all need to struggle all together. Also, he is a very hardworking person. And when we had the moments of crisis, he showed already that he can work 24/7 around the clock. And that's exactly what I see right now. I think that president is showing like an amazing leadership, and the price of people and respect of people all over the country is rising constantly.
And he's been calling for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. I see that's something that you also would like to see. But do you appreciate, however, because of the American fears of the chance of an actual war between US forces and Russia, that unfortunately, for you at least, that remains extremely unlikely?
You see, many things that are happening now, we couldn't believe that they could happen even a week ago. Who could ever thought that, for instance, Germany could suspend Nord Stream 2, or Germany would provide the military equipment to Ukraine, or that the world would sanction the central bank of Russia or ban Russia from SWIFT system. These are the amazing things that are happening right now, and we believe that it is possible to get no-fly zone. You see, Russia has a big superiority because of airspace, so that there won't be any chance that Russia could get to Kyiv so fast as it did in 2 days, just because it could fly over Ukraine. And here is a very important note. People are afraid that there will be the World War III. The issue is, if Putin is not stopped in Ukraine, where is the chance that the World War III won't start? Poland, Moldova, and Baltic states understand for sure that if Putin doesn't stop in Ukraine, he would follow up. And they are really afraid that they will be the next targets. So the issue is how many Ukrainians need to die, that the world understands that we really need this no-fly zone.
Let's join our reporter Gulliver Cragg. He's in Ukraine, of course. He's been moving around to many locations. Currently in Komyunitsky. Gulliver, thanks for being with us. Tell us the latest where you are.
Well, where I am, really, we've just been watching the news unfolding on our smartphones and computers with horror. I haven't been out reporting today. We've been looking at what's been happening in Kharkiv with the terrible bombardment there of that Russian-speaking city, the second biggest city in Ukraine, and then this news in Kyiv of the TV tower being taken down. And I've been getting alerts on my phone all day from the application from Kiev City Hall that tells you when it's time to go to the shelters. So I'm aware in real time, basically, of whenever the sirens are going off in Kiev. I also know that they've been going off even in Vinnytsia, which is the regional capital of the region that I'm in at the moment. Not a particularly strategic target, but it is the headquarters of the Ukrainian Air Force. So there are some military targets in that city. It's really the whole country that's under attack. According to the Ukrainian Interior Ministry, the TV signal will be down only temporarily. They have got a backup place from which they can broadcast. This news that the Russians have warned Ukrainians living near security services headquarters in Kiev to evacuate is particularly worrying, because the security service of Ukraine is located right in the center of Kiev, in the historic center of Kiev, right near the historic St. Sophia's Cathedral. And the Greek Catholic Church actually said that they had information that that cathedral could also be struck. Yes, as I think everybody has been realizing as this day has gone on, the Russian attack has just stepped up a gear and really seriously intensified and doesn't show any signs of letting up.
Gulliver Cragg in Ukraine, thank you so very much indeed. We'll, of course, be getting more from our team as we go through this programme.
Hello, you're watching The Interview on France 24. I'm Europe editor Catherine Nicholson. Now today, amid ever fiercer attacks by Russian forces on Ukraine, I'm speaking to the Foreign Minister of Latvia, a state which was under Soviet rule after World War II until 1991. It's been a NATO member since 2004. Edgars Rinkēvičs, thank you very much for being on the programme.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start off with something that's been in the news on the day that we're recording, Tuesday. The President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, made an emotional appeal to the EU Parliament, asking the EU to support Ukraine formally starting on the path of EU membership. Now, I know that Latvia and 7 other EU member states have already called on the rest of the EU to immediately grant Ukraine EU candidate country status. Why is this so urgent in your view?
Well, indeed, actually, Latvian government endorsed today the formal decision that we support Ukraine's membership in EU and granting candidate status. I think that, of course, we all understand that actually it's quite long and very difficult process, but at this time it is very important to send a very clear signal to those Ukrainians who are fighting for their independence and liberty that they are not alone and that they belong to Europe. And if that's their free choice, and I want to underline, if that's their free choice, they are welcome to the European Union.
You say it's a long and difficult process. What sort of timeline do you think could be realistic for Ukraine to actually join the EU?
Well, it's probably a very difficult question, because I think that we all are currently supporting Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression. But I think that if we really have political will, if Ukraine, when it, let's say, fends off all those attacks that Russian military are currently conducting with the assistance from Belarus, and if they do some reforms, then we can really try to do our best to do this rather quickly. But I would be very careful to name any timelines at this point.
And let's come back then to the situation on the ground inside Ukraine, changing quite quickly, of course, but we have seen a huge Russian military convoy approaching Kiev, cruise missile strikes in Kharkiv. What do you believe Vladimir Putin is doing right now with these moves?
Well, I think that he really wants to achieve his initial goal, to have a regime change in Kiev, to install some kind of puppet government, and then to try to negotiate, let's say, neutrality, non-alignment, and some kind of very close partnership between Ukraine and Russia. But frankly, I think that each and every day of this fighting, especially now when civilians are targeted, when civilians are killed, is actually having an adverse effect. Even if some cities are being taken, even if some cities are being encircled, I think that also Ukrainian will to resist is also rising. And I do believe that with each and every day passing, this situation is unfortunately getting very difficult for civilians, but it's also getting rather complex for the Kremlin.
You said you believe that Vladimir Putin wants regime change in Ukraine. Russia has such an enormous military, and Vladimir Putin has not at this point used the full extent of his military possibilities. He could go a lot further, couldn't he? Do you believe that he could take over this country and try and install that puppet government? That's realistic.
Well, I don't believe that you can occupy country size of Ukraine with that amount of military that Russia has at its disposal. I don't believe. But at the same time, you can actually do your best to inflict enough damage to the country, as I said, to try to install some kind of government in Kyiv so that this government is much friendlier to Russia. But I also believe that this is going to fail. Ukraine is a big country. There are very, I would say, different regions in that country. And I think that resistance is going to be there. And also it would be almost impossible to, let's say, win over the hearts and minds of Ukrainians after what the Russians are doing. Because if your relatives, if your friends, if your family members are killed by Russian bullets or missiles, I can't imagine how those people are going to accept Russia now as their friend. I think that what we are seeing is actually a long-term effect, especially when it comes to relations between Ukrainians and Russians. And I think that at this point, this is going to be very, very ugly future for bilateral relations.
Now, a big threat that Vladimir Putin seems to be making is about relating to his nuclear arsenal. He put it on a heightened state of readiness, sending a strong signal to the West. We've spoken to the Romanian foreign minister, Mr. Orescu, who said he's not convinced that this threat will be followed by the actual use of these nuclear weapons. Do you share his confidence?
Well, I think that there are a couple of elements we should take into account. First, this is not the first time when President Putin was talking about his nuclear forces. Remember that some months after capturing Crimea, he was talking that at that point he was also ready to heighten the alert of the nuclear forces if Ukrainians would resist or the West would come to their assistance. So I think that this is the kind of methodology that if things are getting not so well for him, then of course he is threatening nuclear forces. Number two, I think that it is precisely the kind of message to the publics, look, this land belongs to me, hands off. The third is of course to stop all the assistance that currently European Union, the United Kingdom, the United States and Canada are providing to the Ukrainian armed forces. So I think that what we are seeing is that things are not going in accordance to the plan. Now, if that threat is credible, well, I think that first of all, yes, that's blackmail. Second of all, I do believe that we need to stand firm, and probably one should remind also to Mr. Putin that NATO is nuclear alliance, that United States, France and the United Kingdom, all three possess also the nuclear capabilities, and this is not the way how you can work in this environment, and you should not use the threat and you should not escalate. But I think that this is also the kind of strategy now. Escalate and then actually to de-escalate the situation. So this is an attempt to get Ukrainians, let's say, to lay down their arms. This is about the West to be, let's say, softer in that position. And let's also not forget that it appears that even with all our warnings before 21st of February about huge economic cost of this invasion, possible invasion at that point, that actually nobody in the Russian government, or at least the leadership of Russia, the president and his closest advisors believe that we are going to impose all those sanctions, and more are to come.
Well, indeed, I wanted to ask you about sanctions. But there is a lot of talk about new EU sanctions against Russia. What measures would you endorse?
Well, I do believe one thing that we still need to do, and that's the position of my country, is that we need to impose the same sanctions on Belarus, disconnecting from SWIFT. Because look, first of all, Belarus is hosting Russian troops, and from the territory of Belarus, there have been missiles fired, and also some Russian troop columns have been entering Ukraine. Second, I do believe that Russia can use Belarus to actually somehow avoid some of those sanctions, especially Belarusian banks. So that's one thing. That would have dual effect: punish Belarus, or to get Belarus cooperate with the Western world in order to de-escalate. And second, of course, to build pressure on Russia. Then I think that we still have some possibilities, if things are moving into the, let's say, wrong direction, to look at the expanded list of banks of Russia that should be disconnected from SWIFT, some additional names. Well, there are also some other positions we could look, the maritime sanctions and so on and so on.
In terms of the sanctions on Russia, we have seen quite a huge impact already on the lives of ordinary Russians who've been seen, of course, the ruble has taken a hit, people rushing to try and take their savings out of banks. There are those who say, is the West really punishing Putin here, or is the West punishing ordinary Russians? And could this be counterproductive?
Well, I don't think it's counterproductive, because probably I will sound very harsh, but let me remind you that such actions as Russia currently is conducted and President Putin is in charge wouldn't be possible if a Russian public would disapprove. We have seen some of opinion polls showing that majority of Russians still think that Russia is doing the right thing. So from that point of view, I don't see any way how to dissuade Russia from further escalation as to inflict as much as possible economic cost. And then probably Russian people could ask themselves a couple of questions what their government is doing. And asking those questions in authoritarian regimes, even if there is no free press, even if journalists cannot grill presidents, ministers, other high-level officials, but still, those regimes are closely following the mood change in the public. So, sorry, such kind of attack, actually brutal aggression against other country, means that we cannot actually say, oh, this is only Russian army and a couple of government officials responsible. This time, this is, as it has been in the 20th century with Germany, responsibility of the broader society.
Edgar Zenkiewicz, thank you very much for being with us. That's all we've got time for right now.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And thanks to you as well for watching the interview. You can find all of our editions on our website, france24.com.
Welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. The situation in Ukraine is the focus of world media attention right now. The shelling of Kharkiv has been condemned as a war crime by the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell. There's been damage across the whole of Ukraine, of course, but the next phase of the Russian operation is expected to be bloody. Ukrainian people are said to be resolute and prepared to lay down their lives, best represented perhaps by their own president, Volodymyr Zelensky, still in Kiev and ready, he says, to fight, even as the Russian convoy is said to be closing in. Troops then on the capital of Ukraine. We're asking just how many ordinary people in Russia are actually in favor of this war? How many realize what is actually happening, given the propaganda fed to them by the Russian media? If they knew the truth, could Vladimir Putin continue with this operation? Some Russians have already an insight into what's going on, denied often by the most tame and tethered media you could imagine. Across Russia, there have been protests against the military invasion of Ukraine. 2,000 at least have been arrested, still being held by police from jail. The opposition leader Alexei Navalny has condemned the invasion and called on Russian people to take part. In the Duma, Russia's parliament, there are deputies who've spoken out against the operation too, even those who voted in recognition of the bogus independence of the Donbass in the east of Ukraine. They are now raising questions as to what is actually happening right now. I never voted for this invasion, said one of them. Let's introduce our guests to get some take on what is happening, whether Russian people do know what's happening, and if they did, would they be in favour of it? Joining us by Skype from Kyiv is Kira Rudik, who's a member of Ukraine's parliament. That's the Verkhovna Rada. She's leader of the political party Golos Zmin. Thank you very much for being with us. We'll be with you in a moment. By Skype from Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer joins us, military and defence expert and columnist for Novaya Gazeta. Thank you, sir, for being with us. The guest from Berlin coming very, very soon. We'll bring you him as soon as he arrives. But our next guest is definitely with us from Washington. Christine Berzina, Senior Fellow and Head of Geopolitics Team at the Alliance for Securing Democracy from the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm going to start with Kira, the MP of Ukraine in Kyiv, who is awaiting us there, Kira Rudik. Kira, you've been photographed. You've posted the photograph online of yourself with your arm ready to fight. Is that how you stand right now? Is that how you feel right now?
Absolutely. My position haven't changed. It only became stronger. For the last 6 days, when we've been at war with Russia, I trained to fire the gun, and I assembled the resistance group that is helping right now our army to patrol the streets, and we are getting ready to fight Russian soldiers on our soil. We understand that there could be either a siege on Kyiv, the capital of our country, or there will be a massive attack soon, and we are getting ready. And I'm super proud that as a Ukrainian woman, I'm able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the men and hold the guns as they do, to be able to protect my family, my home, my city, and my country.
Can I ask you, Kira, do you think ordinary Russians are in favour of what's going on?
I know that the Russian propaganda is very strong, so from what I know right now, they don't even realize what's going on. However, the sanctions that were imposed on Russia will hit the ordinary Russians very soon, if it hasn't hit yet, and they will have to realize that something is happening, something is going on. But I can tell you right away that the Russian soldiers, like half of the Russian soldiers, did not realize what they're getting themselves into. They're coming with a quote unquote, we thought we will come here as liberators, that we will be given food, warm clothes, and Ukrainian women will be throwing themselves at us. This is the quote.
Kira, thank you for now very much indeed. Kira Rudik, who's a member of parliament in Kyiv, leader of the political party Golos Zmin. Can I bring in Christine Berzina from Washington, from the German Marshall Fund there? Christine, the situation as we know it, Kyiv basically on the point of being surrounded by this massive convoy that's closing in, people leaving as fast as they possibly can. Over 400,000, according to the UN, have left the country already. Is it possible that the news of what is really happening hasn't spread as far, well, beyond the borders into Russia?
Russia's trying very hard for that information not to go very far into Russia. Of course, it's not a black box. There are those who are able to access foreign media, to go through the social media channels, to see that something is not right. Of course, there have been protests as well in many of the major cities that are protesting the war using the term war. So there is an awareness that something is going on and that perhaps the Kremlin story is not the full story. The fact that the official channels would not necessarily tell the full truth is not a surprise in a country that still remembers its Soviet past, when information was very much whatever the leadership wanted it to be, rather than any recognition of reality. Yet still, when you have the fact that there is one independent television channel and everybody else must be telling the Kremlin's truth, it is difficult for people to get the full scale. And because President Putin has represented the situation such that either Russia is a liberator or Russia is countering genocide, completely false allegations thereof in Ukraine, or that Russia is now being attacked by the West and the Russian people must stand up for the country in light of foreign aggression. This, of course, is also a very powerful message, and there are those who will be inclined to believe that. So there's a challenge right now within Russia to understand what is the truth and what is not the truth. And as you see the repercussions grow, an announcement of 20-year prison sentences for those who help the foreign side in this particular case, with that such a severe repercussion for going out into the streets and objecting, and people having knocks on their doors, if it is suspected that they do not support this action, there are very stiff prices to pay for being skeptical and speaking out against the Kremlin right now.
Indeed, what is judged as helping the other side, Christine, is obviously something that perhaps in other countries you would think it was actually something trivial. But as you say, something like going out and protesting could be judged in the harshest possible way.
Absolutely, because on the one hand, yes, this is an onslaught and a fight against Ukraine, an incredibly horrible invasion of a sovereign democratic country on Russia's borders. But this is also about the Russian regime's survival. President Putin takes this personally. From the very beginning, it has never been in President Putin's interest to have a democratic, economically prosperous Ukraine on his border, because that shows his own population. If Ukraine can do it, and Ukraine is so much like us, then clearly we can have the same kind of government, the same kind of prosperity here. That is not in President Putin's interest in the least. And that in and of itself has been a threat to regime stability. So right now, when you have so much worldwide opposition to President Putin's war, naturally, the Kremlin will feel even more embattled and will take even harsher measures, even domestically, to make sure that regime stability is maintained.
Christine Berzina, Senior Fellow at the German Marshall Fund and leader of the geopolitics team at the Alliance for Securing Democracy there. For the moment, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in from Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer, military and defense expert and columnist for Novaya Gazeta. Pavel, the floor is open to you, sir. Tell us your take on the situation. Are Russian people getting the truth?
Well, of course not. The first casualty of war is always the truth. And so there is, of course, a massive propaganda. It's not always that successful because, well, there are ways to bypass it by going into the internet. And so there is opposition to this war. It's not yet the majority at all. And, well, it's kind of a bit scattered. But on the other hand, there's no great enthusiasm for the war either. And that's also a fact. Anyways, the Kremlin is very nervous. And today, right now, as we're speaking, they began a massive suppression of what's left of the free Russian press. So as we were just speaking right now, during this program, the independent radio station Echo Moskvy was closed down, basically. They've been taken off air and their site has been closed down. And apparently the independent TV station Dost, which is also right now broadcasting in the internet, is also being taken down. So the Kremlin, yes, is afraid that there is going to be resistance to this war as the campaign drags on and becomes more bloodier. And they're clearing out all the vestiges they had to demonstrate to the world that there are opposition voices in Russia. Well, right now they're not anymore.
Will your telling of the story at the Novaya Gazeta be different from the telling of the story from, say, France 24?
Well, of course, because if I say something there, the newspaper might be closed down. So I prefer France 24, obviously. And other, of course, I mean, I give lots of interviews on it, but some of them are to Russian-speaking outlets like Dozhd or Echo, but right now they're being closed down. There's something left in the internet. But mostly it's already English-speaking kind of stations. Russia is closing in. The regime is barricading itself. It's a very nasty situation, and I'm afraid it will get worse since the war is not a resounding success at all. Actually, it's illegal right now in Russia to say publicly that it's a war. It should be called a special operation. I don't know, they believe that's better somehow.
Indeed. People are still dying, aren't they? That's the bottom line. And even today, 5 more people losing their lives in that strike on the TV tower in Kiev. Pavel, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Pavel Felgenhauer joining us there from Moscow, columnist for the Novaya Gazeta. We have the Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik joining us from Kyiv. We've got Christine Batsiena joining us from Washington from the German Marshall Fund, and another guest, Henning Hoff, now connected and with us from Berlin. I hope you can hear us, sir, and I hope we can hear you. Editor-at-large of the International Politik at German Council on Foreign Relations. We're debating, or we started with the question, do the Russian people actually know what's going on, Henning? Obviously, we have, I think, in the terms of asking that question, already decided that we think they don't. Is that fair to say, do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree. It's clear that this is also about sort of who knows what. And it seems to me that I think we have still slight problems with the sound, I'm afraid.
Henning, stop there. Stop there, Henning. We'll sort the sound out so you can be at ease and talk to us and give us your opinions. We've got another 40 minutes in the debate, so we'll get that sorted. Thank you, sir. I'll get the technical team to check everything from your end and our end, and we'll come back to you as soon as we can. Henning Hoff in Berlin, thank you very much indeed. Let's come back to our guests who've already spoken. Kira Rudik in Kiev. I hope you're still with us. You told us you're ready to fight, and clearly you've heard what Pavel is saying in Moscow. Do you agree with his assessment of things? Do you think that there is this sense that basically the Kremlin is barricading itself in and is realizing it's actually sort of bitten off more than we can chew, as we say, basically fighting a losing battle now?
Well, this is what keeping us alive, the belief that this is what's happening and this is what's going on. So for the last 6 days, there has not been a major victory from Putin's side, and he has not taken any major city of Ukraine, though he tried. Oh, believe me, he tried. And he was trying to take anything to be able to show some pictures to the Russian citizens inside the country, but he was not able to. This means there were serious miscalculations on his side, and right now he is backing off with barricading and stepping up as a dictator more and more and more, with closing the media, with attacking the civilians here in Ukraine, with doing more and more steps to be imposed to more and more sanctions. He planned for a blitzkrieg. Really, like that he will come here and will take cities of Ukraine like in 1 day, maybe in 2 days. And this hasn't happened, and we don't see anything like this happening within like the next couple of days. And we are getting stronger every day, and same time, Russia is getting weaker because the sanctions are working. So actually, we only have seen 1 day of sanctions working. One, it was yesterday, the Monday, like today, tomorrow, more and more Russian citizens will start feeling that something is going on, that their credit cards get declined, that their assets being frozen, that they, for like, I don't know, 3rd time in the last 30 years, have lost their banking accounts, etc., etc. And Russian oligarchs and their surroundings will also start feeling that something is going on, that their children have to come back from Miami and London and live in the beautiful places such as Oryol or whatever. And this will create more and more tension inside Russia. Putin will obviously try to to pressure it and put it down. But once there will be more and more of these small bites, these small attacks from all over the place, it will be harder to do. So I can tell you, Ukraine and we as Ukrainians, we have only two hopes. The first one is on ourselves and our partners, on ourselves that we will fight as hard, that we will be able to push Russian troops from our soil. But the second hope is that Russia collapses and the regime collapses, and that there will be this root of evil who is pushing right now the forces onto our cities. So these are the two things that we are really hoping for, and one wouldn't probably happen without another, because we can fight very hard, but at some point our resources will exhaust. And our partners, our international partners, can also help us and support us, but at some point these resources will exhaust. That's why it's so important to move in the same directions. So the sanctions, the military support, Ukrainians people bravery and fight, additional sanctions, closing the sky for Ukraine. All these things need to happen at the same time, so it will be a winning war for Ukraine and for democratic countries that we are right now protecting with our lives and blood.
Kira Ruddock in Kiev, thank you very much indeed. There with no doubt your Kalashnikov handy, I imagine, because you've been online talking about that. You've just told us about how you can care for that gun, take it apart, put it back together and be ready. Let's hear now from NATO's Secretary General. He's been categoric in his condemnation of the Russian invasion. Jens Stoltenberg says both Russia and Belarus are guilty parties in the current conflict.
Putin has shattered peace in Europe. Allies condemn the unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine. The Russian assault is totally unacceptable, and it is enabled by Belarus.
Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO there. Let's go to Berlin, where Henning Hoff hopefully is now reattached, able to hear, and we are able to hear him and see him. Henning, I can see you there, sir. Great to have you back. We were talking about the situation in Kiev. We've seen images from Kharkiv, where the destruction there has been described by Joseph Borrell of the EU as on the level of war crimes. Kira was talking about blitzkrieg, a term from the Second World War with the German lightning attacks on towns. What we're seeing in Kharkiv, do you sense that that is something that one day will be prosecuted by an international court?
It pretty much looks like it. I think the blitzkrieg strategy, which Putin has sort of tried in the first week of the war, sort of clearly has failed and has not produced this kind of news that he had wanted to get out of this this invasion. And I think it's been putting him in a very difficult position. And this kind of feeling that he is overreaching, that he is sort of going too far, is also endangering his own standing in Russia, as my colleagues have already pointed out. There's a real danger now to him and his regime in as far as he can sort of really sort of balance the different things he has started in this criminal way. There's a brutal war which is likely to get even more bloodier. And then there is a Russian public which is sort of already getting a little sort of suspicious what is actually going on. There's this joke making the rounds, but Pavel probably knows this much better, that sort of people are starting to ask, have you read A Special Military Operation and Peace by Leo Tolstoy? And this already sort of signals to me, at least, that the Russian public is getting more and more aware what is actually happening on the ground in Ukraine.
Pavel Felgenhauer in Moscow, columnist for the Novaya Gazeta. The images that Kira was speaking about earlier, about soldiers being captured, are these things that have played in Russia? Are these things that have been suppressed?
Well, more or less suppressed, though right now the authorities agree that there were casualties, there are casualties, there are prisoners, and they're mistreated by the Ukrainians. But basically, it's a story about success. And actually, it should be understood that there are two big operations happening right now in Ukraine. One is in the south, run by this southern military district of Russia, and the other in the north, run by the western military district. Well, the one in the north is a bit faltering. The one in the south is rather successful, actually. The Russian forces and tanks broke out of Crimea, have spread out into the steppes, have taken a number of cities, not very small cities to say so, and also right now have managed to cross the Dnieper, and apparently today have entered the city of Kherson, which is a strategically important port on the Black Sea. So apparently Russia will be soon in the position to cut Ukraine away from the sea entirely, make it a landlocked country. So there, the operation is not that unsuccessful. In the north, there are problems. That's acknowledged. But apparently they'll try to do something about that. Russia still has the initiative. Ukrainians surprised everyone by continuing into the almost already a week to have organized resistance. They still have their military staffs working, the command structure working. The Pentagon said they had only 72 hours and organized resistance would collapse and would be a guerrilla warfare. It's not. And that's, of course, very important psychologically and militarily. There's maybe even a narrow path to the future for Ukraine to kind of win this war. But it's very narrow. And Russia has many aces up its sleeve. It's not over, and it will continue.
Indeed, I don't think any of us doubt that it's over. I think we're all expecting something to happen around Kiev very shortly. Ukraine's health ministry, Pavel, just staying with you for a second, saying this figure dates back to the weekend. 352 civilians have been killed. That includes 14 children. I mean, that's kind of something that really brings home the extent of what is happening. And I'm thinking about the images from Kharkiv. They surely have been seen on Russian media. What's the reaction been to that?
Yes, they were shown there on Russian media, and it was said that it was a Ukrainian missile that hit the main square in Kharkiv.
So that's the Russian narrative. It was a Ukrainian attack on their own city.
Yeah, that's what the Russian public is. I just saw that on Russian TV. It sounds ridiculous, but okay, that's what the Russian propaganda is running. And so hoping that the Putin's regime will just begin to kind of unravel because there are casualties and the war is running not very successful is very premature. Later, it's actually no matter what the Russian public thinks or says, without serious support and a split within the ruling class and bureaucracy, you can't budge the regime. So you have to have a combination of things. The public with discontent, which might grow as the Russian economy tanks, and it's going to tank. Our minimum lending rate, lending rate right now of the central bank is 20%. You can't run an industrial economy on 20% interest. It's going to tank. There's going to be people who will lose jobs, or at least good jobs. The level of household incomes is going to decrease. The war most likely will drag on, and there'll be more casualties. And this will have a cumulative effect, not just simply someone being killed there, which is, of course, regrettable, but doesn't rock the population. A Russian attitude towards casualties is not the same as in Israel or France or America. It's a different country. But economic woes, bad war, that altogether may begin to unravel the regime, at least put some serious question marks on its survivability.
Pavel, thank you very much for that. We're hoping to get Kira Rudik back for more contributions from Kiev. Before that, let's take a look at something that is being called for by Vladimir Zelensky. This is a no-fly zone for Russian missiles, planes, helicopters, etc., to create a kind of safe space over Ukraine. Let's take a look at our report now from Emerald Maxwell here at France 24.
As Russian forces close in and shelling of Ukrainian cities intensifies, calls for a no-fly zone over the country are growing.
Evil, armed with missiles, bombs and artillery, must be stopped immediately. I believe that the complete closure of the sky for Russian missiles, planes and helicopters should be considered.
We have a right to prohibit the entrance to our airspace, and that would be one of the most effective steps for the European security.
The Ukrainian calls are being echoed by some in NATO states, such as the Estonian Prime Minister.
No-fly zone would definitely help to protect Ukraine.
And this US representative, who argued that establishing an area over which aircraft are forbidden to fly would give the heroic Ukrainians a fair fight. But no-fly zones have to be enforced, which countries do by attacking any planes that violate the ban. It means NATO allies would have to commit to shooting down Russian jets, tantamount to a declaration of war on Moscow.
A no-fly zone would require implementation. It would require deploying U.S. military to enforce, which would be a direct conflict, potentially a direct conflict, and potentially a war with Russia.
The US and its allies used no-fly zones in Iraq after the Gulf War, Bosnia during the mid-90s conflict, and in Libya in 2011. But then they were facing vastly inferior military forces, not one of the world's top nuclear powers, with a leader who has already ordered its nuclear forces on high alert. The Russian Air Force is also second in size only to the US's, and Vladimir Putin has already shown he's not afraid of escalation.
Let's go to Washington, where we have Christine Batzina of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Christine, Joe Biden, as I understand it, against this idea of a no-fly zone. What's your take on the situation?
I think that there are significant risks for NATO, for the United States, for any European country in proceeding with a no-fly zone. Right now, what there is unanimous approval for across NATO and across Europe is to support Ukraine with significant arms, with military equipment, with medical assistance, discussions potentially of taking wounded across. That is fully in play. The idea of US or European NATO members coming into a direct military conflict with the Russian military is currently a no-go zone. Clearly, the NATO and the United States, Europeans do not want to wind up in a quickly escalating, potentially nuclear conflict with Russia, given that President Putin has already warned of such unthinkable consequences. Even in the discussion of fighter jets going to Ukraine, these would have had to be Russian-made MiGs transferred over to Ukraine, not with the pilots. This is about equipment. Equipment seems fine. Military support of ammunition, of guns, of anti-aircraft, anti-tank weaponry, all of that absolutely, and is being quickly mobilized. But putting NATO troops in those pieces of equipment to enforce and push back Russia seems beyond what is currently politically and for the defense of NATO from a security perspective possible. A no-fly zone sounds great. If you think of it as, oh, maybe that would be effective, but the kind of global conflict that could result in would not be as good for anybody involved. Because, of course, Ukraine also needs the continual support of the West right now. There are other options that could be possible. Is there somewhere in a border area, some kind of secure area? You know, a different option, but certainly not what Ukraine is asking for at the moment. And the tragedy of the fact that this cannot be delivered immediately in the way that Ukraine asks is not lost on populations, whether in the United States or across Europe, because we are restricted in many ways because of the Russian nuclear threat, because of not wanting to enter an open shooting war with Russia, which we have not had. And yet we can see that 50-kilometer-long convoy of Russian military equipment coming closer and closer to Kiev. So this is where the tools that the West is using, helping the Ukrainians with military equipment as much as possible, playing a long game with sanctions, as we just heard from Pavel, they could take effect. There could be change on the ground in Russia, but that will take time. It's not going to happen in these first days of the war. And yet, the tragedies, the imminent need for assistance in Kiev is something that is happening right now, today, tonight, as night falls again in Kiev, and we see so much of this taking place in the overnight hours. This is something that is so immediate, and the tools that we have, unfortunately, are much more long-term.
Christine, hear what you're saying completely. So the no-fly zone would be probably a negative thing to go for. I'm taking out of NATO and the EU as one here, and I know there are differences, but separations, but clearly in how an ordinary Russian might be told the story, it might look like the same kind of aggression, because the EU has just approved something like 450 million euros of military aid. I presume that will be redigested and regurgitated for the Russian public in a very negative manner, won't it?
The long-term narrative that President Putin has talked about with NATO or Europe was that these are aggressive institutions, that they are encroaching on Russian territory. Of course, none of this has any basis. This is, according to the Helsinki Accords, sovereign states the opportunity to choose their alliances, their partnerships, and this is not and NATO is fundamentally a defensive organization. And of course, when you look at the enormous territory of Russia, what borders it has with NATO countries are laughingly small. So an idea of an encroachment in terms of scale is just ludicrous. And yet there is this very strong narrative that has been promoted now for 2 decades by President Putin in his current role. And that narrative has taken hold across the population. And if you have you have arms coming from the West, yes, that will, of course, be portrayed as the West stoking the war, causing the war. All of these talking points, again, regurgitated and put out by RT and other Russian media to global audiences. But you don't get into a shooting conflict between Russia and NATO or Russia and European countries individually until you have troops involved. And that is the situation that NATO and Europe is really trying to avoid while being as helpful as they possibly can be to Ukraine right now.
Christine, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Berlin. Henning Hoff waiting there. Henning, German Finance Minister Christian Lindner saying the sanctions against Putin and his circle need to be further tightened. Is that going to make the difference, do you think, this idea of actually sort of putting more grips upon the likes of Putin and his circle?
Well, I think there's already has been a lot being done in that direction, and as Finance Minister Lindner and also Chancellor Scholz sort of said today, there's more up the sleeve. I think what Christina said from Washington right now is absolutely right. There's no sort of there's a danger of sort of coming to direct contact between NATO troops and the Russians. This is something no one wants at that moment of time. But of course, sort of maximizing help for Ukraine is pretty much what is pursued here in Europe, and that probably will entail also so more sanctions. I think they are thinking at the moment about sort of increasing the pressure on the so-called oligarchs, the sort of rich businessmen who sort of underpinning the Putin regime. That so far we have seen sort of the freezing of assets, but we haven't seen the seizure of assets. There's certainly some sort of steps of sort of escalating the situation even a little more. I think these are steps we are likely to see coming from Europe and possibly also the Americans if this war is going the way we all fear it will be.
You mentioned oligarchs. I'm thinking of the likes of Roman Abramovich, who owns the football team. That's the for any American viewers, of course, we're talking the round ball. We're talking Chelsea Football Club in London. He stepped away from it. I presume that would be Henning to protect that for being an asset that might be seized in some way, shape or form. But my question, Henning, is this. Can someone like Abramovich or someone like Alisher Usmanov have the kind of access to Putin that might make a difference? Do you feel, Henning, that someone like that might be able to sort of point out to Putin that this isn't going the way he wanted it to go, and maybe he should change his tactics or even turn back and pull out?
Well, that is one of the big questions which sort of keeps us all occupied at the moment. How far, or actually how close are those people still to Putin, and whether they have any standing yet? But I think, as Pavel said a moment ago, it's a combination of various factors which might work towards to ending this invasion, and one, of course, is putting ever more pressure on those we have for a long time have been quite lenient about. I mean, if you mentioned London. There's this sort of it's a long time perception that the city of London has always welcomed money from Russia and from other post-Soviet countries, and hasn't looked too closely where all this money is actually coming from. I think this is changing now in a very significant way, and this sort of is again a sort of further pressure point on the Putin regime, as sort of this so far this interaction with the West was an important part of how this whole system functioned. And if you look what has happened within the last 7 days, the sanctions which have been put on Russia are really unprecedented. And we still sort of only sense sort of how significant they will actually be. And I think to keep the pressure up in that direction is certainly a good move. Whether it will sort of lead to Vladimir Putin immediately changing his mind, probably not. It is I fear a long game we are playing, and it needs some sort of determination and persistence. As Christian said from Washington, it breaks one's heart that one couldn't do more.
Henning, thank you very much indeed. I'm actually more or less out of time now, but I need 2 last comments from Moscow and from Kiev. First, Pavel, and if you can be brief, please, Pavel, I would appreciate this. What happens next? How will it be reported in Moscow? How will Putin benefit or not?
Well, the reporting in Moscow is very wartime. So I guess they get their directives from the Kremlin, they get their emphasis, and they're pushing that thing down. But it's not, of course, like during 50, 70 years ago. There are alternative sources of information for those who want to seek them. Not all of the population wants to seek them. Many are comfortable living in the shell of Russia is right and the rest of the world is wrong, and that they're all to blame, and that will continue for some time, as until the hardships of what really happened. Of course, the Russians people see what's happening with the exchange rates, because not many Russians have stocks in equities, but the dollar and the euro are very important. Everyone understands that there's going to be a terrible burst.
And at some point, they'll find it difficult to buy food, won't they? Pavel, thank you very much indeed, sir, for that view from Moscow. Let's go to Kiev too to end this debate. Kira Rudik is back with us, member of Ukraine's parliament, of the party Golos Zmin, and of course armed and ready to respond, and awaiting what happens next in Kiev. Kira, what's your final message for this debate? What's your final word from where you are?
Well, I had to interrupt the connection because there was an Air Force attack right away today. And this is what Putin is doing, and this is what where we need help from all the democratic countries right now. I want to stress once again that the war that is happening right now, it's not a war between Russia and Ukraine. This is a more global situation where we are asking ourselves a question. If there is a force in the world right now that is able to stop Putin, And Ukraine is this force now. However, we need help, and we need help from each and every country in the world who wants us to win. And this starts with the no-fly zone over Ukraine that could be implemented anyway, with NATO implementation, with NATO without it being officially there. But this is something that is needed to be done right now before it is too late. Right now, right away, when we are talking, Russian Air Force is bombing Kharkiv, Mariupol, Melitopol, and Kiev. And this will be something that cannot be taken away, cannot be reverted. And this is why every single day that we are waiting, there will be more and more Ukrainians who are fighting Russians. There will be more and more of them dying, more and more of us dying. We are here to protect our countries. We are here, but we need your support, and we are asking for it.
Loud and clear. Kira Rudik, MP in Ukraine in the Kiev Parliament. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to Pavel Felgenhauer from Novaya Gazeta in Moscow. Thank you to Henning Hoff in Berlin from the German Council on Foreign Relations. And thank you to Christine Betzina from the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Thanks to you for watching too. Stay with us for all on Ukraine and all the world news here on France 24.
We can cross now live to Moscow, get the perspective from there with correspondent Jake Cordell. Jake, thanks for being on the programme today. You'll have heard these reports that Russian forces may be planning to encircle the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. What is your understanding today of the current military strategy of the Russian army?
Yeah, it seems and it appears, and it's quite evident from the reports we just heard, that Russia is hardening its military strategy. Putin is doubling down both on the military side and on the limited diplomatic side. Military analysts believe that Russia was hoping for a quick advance to Kiev, which clearly hasn't happened. We're now on the 6th day. They've only been able to shell certain areas and control very limited territory, particularly in the eastern region. And it appears that the Western sanctions that have been hit on Russia have really just encouraged Putin to really go hard on this strategy, as we saw those horrific pictures from Kharkiv earlier today from the shelling, and yesterday. At the same time, he's also hardening on the diplomatic side of things, because he's saying that he's even upped his demands. Now he wants Ukraine to fully recognize Crimea. He's basically said about 3 or 4 times publicly that he won't stop until Volodymyr Zelensky is out of power in Kiev. So we're really seeing Putin going hard into this maybe siege mentality of his own as he attempts to put pressure onto Ukraine to accept his terms, which clearly, as we've seen, is not on the table.
And Jake, it's becoming increasingly clear that in the coming days, Russia will be isolated, not just economically, which we spoke about yesterday, but also in the realms of culture, in the realms of sport. Give us a sense from Russians that you're able to speak to about to what extent this is hitting home with them.
Yeah, well, those are the two ways that this war really hits home with the majority of Russians, is through the economic pain they're going to feel, which is obviously already happening, and those sporting sanctions. You know, it's things like being kicked out of FIFA, the Russian ballet being kicked out of London, the Russian sportsmen aren't allowed to compete internationally. Russia really prides itself on its sporting achievements, so those things really do hit hard. And we're also seeing state TV here in Russia use these things of, for example, companies pulling out of Russia, or as I said, ballet performance not being allowed to go ahead, as evidence of some anti-Russia agenda from the West. So it's used as a propaganda tool by the Russians to try and whip up this fever that the West is out to get us and everyone's against us, and you really need to get behind your country right now. So they're using it for their own gains. I think for most people that watch it, it does feel a bit shallow, and the more this cultural, sporting, economic isolation increases, the more ordinary Russians are going to realize that this isn't going the way they were told it was going to go, or the way the Kremlin wanted it to go.
Jake Cordell, live in Moscow. Thank you very much indeed for your reporting today.
the situation is really, really dire here at the border. To give you an idea, I arrived yesterday and there were about half of the people that we can see now. There's more and more people coming through the border. Behind me, you can see being set up some humanitarian help, very scarce at the moment. There's one point where refugees can get some food. There's some tents, white tents here in the back. They weren't here an hour ago. They have just been set up. Here, hundreds of people who are here. I can show you a little bit around people arriving. There's police cars. There's also ambulances here. And I'm turning just here opposite me, behind me, you have the border with Ukraine. And a lot of people are, blocked between the two borders in a kind of buffer zone. They have passed the Ukraine border. They're still waiting for their entrance to be processed by Polish border guards. Once they come through, the Polish government has organized buses which carry them to emergency shelters. Schools in the area have been requisitioned. They will spend 1 or 2 nights there before being transported in other cities. Most people arriving do want to reach cities just like Krakow or Warsaw. You could see also a lot of cars here, not only officials' car, the authorities' car. You also have dozens of cars from Polish people coming from Estonia, coming from Lithuania. It's mostly people who have relatives in Ukraine, Ukrainians themselves who have come here at the border to pick up their families. I was talking earlier to a young man who's Ukrainian. He's left Prague 3 days ago. He wanted to pick up his family, his 70-year-old dad, his mother. His dad had just gotten a heavy operation when the war began, and he just took the road from Kiev. He's been waiting at the border for 4 days, sleeping in the car. And those of the refugees who are lucky enough to be in a car, they wait for a long time. But let's not forget that there's also thousands of people who are just hoping to cross the border, and they're just by foot. To give you an idea, there's 70 kilometers from the border behind me. You have the city of Lviv. It's not so far, but there's a traffic jam of 60 kilometers on that road leading to the Polish border. People waiting for days to, just to drive this very small amount of road, if you will. So a very, very dire situation here indeed.
We are going to now cross live back to Kyiv because the Foreign Affairs Minister there, Dmytro Kuleba, is just starting to speak. Let's take a listen.
Ракетні обстріли Харкова, Києва, інших українських міст.
Have seen that combats have intensified in Kharkov and in Kiev. Children are being killed. People are suffering underground and in hospitals. All of this
запустити один чіткий сигнал.
All of this has allowed us to send a clear signal around the world, a strong signal. Russia equals barbarians. I'm calling on all of you to use all your contacts so that everyone around the world know what is happening here. Currently, the entire world is admiring Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, admires President Zelensky.
Не евакуація, а амуніція. І нікуди він не поїде.
He was offered to leave Ukraine, but answered that he didn't need a ride, but he needed munitions. This is how things have always been in Ukraine, at the darkest hours for our homeland. We have always found the strength within ourselves, and the entire world has been witness to this, and the impossible has become possible. For years, Putin has been a bandit who tried to frighten the entire world, and the entire world tried to find ways to enter into dialogue with him, who even offered him money. And yet, if truth be told, Everyone wanted to put him in his place, and yet no one could find the inner courage to do so. And yet Ukraine has found this courage within itself. Ukraine has overcome these difficulties and has shown that Putin deserves to be punished for his actions. Everyone working in business who for years was nourishing illusions that the war could be wrought in Ukraine. All these people have to be held responsible. We have been hearing all the analyses from our partners pertaining to the Donbass crisis. And I remember what the world's reaction was during the first 24 hours of this invasion. There were many who thought that Ukraine would fall. They thought that we would not be able to hold out. Our ambassador even heard reactions that stated, why give aid to you since you will not be able to hold out for more than 24 hours? But the last days have shown that Ukraine has been able to prevail, and the entire world has been able to change the point of view. All of those who were afraid of Moscow have changed their attitude. And so what has happened? Well, everything that has happened is thanks to our armed forces and thanks to our diplomatic efforts under Zelensky. 24/7, we have been working unrelentlessly in order to transform these emotions that have overwhelmed the world into concrete steps and measures. During the early days, I was called to share emotions and empathy. And I said, I do not need your compassion, your empathy. I need Russia to be isolated and I need ammunition. Thanks to our honesty, thanks to our capacity to say things as they are, we've seen that sanctions have been adopted, sanctions against Russia, and this has been done thanks to the Ukrainian people, a people that has not been afraid to stand up to the challenge. The armed forces and our partners are doing everything to isolate Russia. We are calling for military help right now. At this very moment, fuel, munitions, military equipment are on their way to Ukraine so that we can push back the invaders, so that we can put an end to the Russian threat, a threat that threatens the entire world. We are on our land and we will defend it. This is a just and patriotic war for us. I am being honest with you. Putin has not been broken yet. He is looking for a military solution to this conflict. He is striving for a military result for his own benefit. He is throwing more and more troops and convoys against us and has orders to shoot civilians and blow them up. All of this has been documented, all of this has been recorded, and we will make sure that all these war crimes do not go unpunished. We will work with international courts and tribunals to guarantee this. But right now, we need something else. We need to stand fast, even if it is extremely complicated. The enemy has already been broken. Their morale is broken. Russia is already suffering because of the impact on people's standards of living and of the isolation it has been targeted by. But we need to stay strong. We have to undergo all these difficulties and all these challenges. But Ukrainians will never be broken. And this is our ultimate and existential struggle for us, for the Ukrainian people. This must be a struggle that will lead to victory, and I'm sure that we will win. We have opened up a second front, a diplomatic front line. The whole world has rallied behind us and is putting pressure on Russia, is imposing heavy sanctions on Russia. Investments are being pulled out of Russia. This is our second diplomatic front, which is supporting us, which is allowing us to stand fast and to continue to fight. On this day, the 1st of March, the situation is as follows. Yesterday was a historic day for us. The President Zelensky signed the EU Accession Act. Certain European allies supported our request to join the EU. And now we need to make the last steps to destabilize Putin. And I'm sure that this decision will be taken and that we will do everything we can for this decision to be approved. The political history of President Zelensky, thanks to the support for the support for Ukraine joining the EU, this will be a door that will open our road to prosperity. Now, when it comes to military support, I can't tell you very much about this, but we are receiving a lot of aid, a lot of help. We are accepting helmets, bulletproof vests, military equipments, artillery. Diplomats and military officials are strengthening our air defenses thanks to defensive aircraft. Just half an hour ago, I still had doubts that this would happen, but we managed to do this. These decisions are being taken. I cannot unveil the list of all the countries that are supporting us militarily because this would not be good for our security. But there are javelins, there are combat equipments, 50,000 grenade launchers, munitions, bulletproof vests, Stinger missiles. All of this being delivered in large quantities, and these equipments will strengthen our defenses in the hours ahead. We can maybe give you some examples that will show you the unprecedented level of support, this strength of our second diplomatic front. Finland, a neutral country, has supported us militarily, and this is the first time they have done this in the history of their country. The last time this had happened was in 1939 when the USSR invaded Finland. This was a turning point during the Second World War, and we all know this. And since then, Finland has never supplied anyone with military aid. But this is something that has changed. Sweden has also decided to provide military support. Sorry, Finland has never supported anyone militarily, whereas Sweden had supported Finland in 1939. Norway has accepted a request to support all of those who are not part of NATO by sending 2,000 combat units. Luxembourg, a very small country, is also sending us munitions. Austria, a neutral country, is sending us bulletproof vests. On top of this, we have also signed agreements thanks to which hundreds of thousands of tons of equipment are on their way to us. We have to stand fast. We need to push back the enemy. We have no right to be broken. It is Vladimir Putin's system that will be broken. Secondly, these sanctions hurt, and so does isolation. You've read the latest news. You've seen what isolation is doing to Russia. Today, Russia is a country that has become barbaric. Large companies around the world are cutting their ties with Russia. They are closing subsidiaries in Russia, and they are cutting off access to their services. What we are witnessing now is a de-Putinization of the entire world. The anti-Putin coalition has rallied together. But all has not been won yet. We need to continue to work and to persuade people. We need to show examples of our defenders, of people who have fallen. But certain actions have been crowned with success, and the Russian Federation deserves these sanctions, and we are asking the world to strengthen these sanctions and exert more pressure until Putin calls his troops back, until he pays the heavy price for what he has undertaken. We will do everything so that Russia is banished from the world stage. I have already stated that the decision to disconnect Russia from the SWIFT banking system is that this is a decision that will be implemented very soon, and Russian banks that will be decoupled from the SWIFT banking system. We are also asking for a veto and an embargo on the export of Russian oil and gas. The UK, the United States, Australia, Switzerland, all these countries are requesting these sanctions. Switzerland, for the first time, has aligned itself with the European anti-Russian sanctions. Countries that, up until very recently, were still neutral, are rallying together with all of those that are standing up to Russia. Asia, which is very cautious, is also slowly joining this coalition. Singapore is imposing restrictions against Russian banks. Our partners are hitting the Russian central bank hard. The United States, the European Union have done this. Canada has stopped all its financial institutions from carrying out transactions with Russia. Monaco has also imposed sanctions against Russian elites. The United States have kicked out Russian diplomats in order to exert pressure on Russia. All Western services are inaccessible to Russians. Without Netflix, without Amazon, they no longer have access to these services. Yesterday, one of the EU countries' foreign ministers called to say that one of the Russian oligarchs couldn't pay for his hotel room in Europe and was looking for solutions and asked for justice. But justice for him are sanctions. The ruble has been in free fall, and the skies have been closed to Russian aircraft. Sanctions are already heavy and are producing effects, are producing consequences for Russia, and unfortunately for the Russian people, for all the citizens of that country, because they will also suffer and they will feel the impact of the sanctions. Now, they are in shock, but with time, this shock will turn to rage. Humanitarian aid is making its way to Ukraine, is getting here. France, Switzerland, India, Estonia, Lithuania are sending us convoys with humanitarian aid. £140 million have been sent from the UK to support humanitarian aid. This humanitarian aid is vital, because we can see that Russia is destroying in a barbaric manner civilian infrastructure in order to cut people off from water, electricity, and basic services. We are doing everything so that this humanitarian aid can be channeled correctly, so that Ukrainians can have access to drinking water, to basic food staples, to medical supplies. Russia is becoming more and more isolated. A certain number of countries have closed off their airspace to Russian aircraft. Russia can no longer freely travel through the seas and oceans, and cannot dock at international ports. Many international players have closed their ports, and international sporting associations have also closed their doors to Russia. Russian singers will no longer be able to take the stage during Eurovision or other competitions and events. The international anti-Putin coalition is moving forward. Ukrainian diplomacy is standing fast and is helping the Ukrainian armed forces. Today, I gave the order to all our ambassadors and to all our consulates to do the following. Firstly, to do everything that's necessary for this war, to work for munitions, sanctions, and humanitarian aid. Secondly, and this is something the diplomats are working on right now, the diplomats have to do everything in order to push back this pro-Putin vision of the world, to fight against it at all levels. And I ask you all to support these efforts.
All right, you've been listening there to a little of Dmytro Kuleba, the Ukrainian foreign minister. Some strong words from him there today. Putin has not defeated Ukraine, he said. He went on to say that he believed that war crimes were being committed in this conflict. And he said that Ukraine will seek justice at the International Criminal Court. First, though, he says, Ukraine still needs more military support and more diplomatic support as well. Well, listening to that speech with me was our foreign editor, Philip Turl. And Philip, what did you make of that? It was really a rather defiant speech, wasn't it?
Let's put it two ways, shall we? I think, yes, definitely a defiant speech and a galvanizing speech for the people of Ukraine to let them know what is going on there, what the international reaction has been. You must remember that Ukraine, or many Ukrainians, may have little or no access to media at the moment. They are hiding in basements in the cold, and they may not know exactly what is going on and how much the international community is behind Ukraine, what the supply of munitions and weapons is, and how Ukraine is being supported by the European Union, the United States, Britain, other countries around the world. So that is the first point here. He was quite outspoken about the risks still being run by Ukraine, saying that Putin has not been broken. He wants a military result for his own benefit, but that Ukraine will not let him get away with war crimes, and that Ukrainians will never be broken. And I'm sure that Ukraine, he was saying, will win. There was a second part to this speech, which was more to do with the diplomatic front from outside. He was welcoming all those countries that have pledged support for Ukraine, munitions, military hardware, particularly singling out Finland and Sweden, saying this was the first time that they had got involved in supporting another country since the Second World War, since 1939. Also Switzerland, for the first time, contributing towards Ukraine's war effort. So I think a galvanizing speech to try to give hope to the people of Ukraine, but underlining the warning there that Vladimir Putin has not been beaten so far.
Philip Turl, thank you very much indeed for your analysis on the programme. And